Every year, at around this time, a crispness lingers in the air and makes me think of the impending changing of the seasons. What it also reminds us of is the start of the spooky season and the sharing of stories and tales about things that go bump in the night. To honor this particular season, today on Unblurring the Unknown, we dive into Halloween lore and legend and explore these urban legends that have been passed throughout time during Halloween and figure out, is there any truth to them after all? Could these stories be mere fairy tales? Or could they have been inspired by true events? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, we pull back the curtain on some Halloween urban legends. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am Dominic, and obviously I'm returning from a brief, short little hiatus I had from doing the show. I had a lot of things I was sorting out within my life, being my full-time job, and also other personal things in my life, that took precedence over the show, unfortunately. Of course, that doesn't mean that I haven't been researching and compiling topics to share with you, as well as trying to make sure, I have this kind of little dedicated podcasting space at my home. Now, with all that going on, I still have obviously had time and gotten a little bit in the Halloween spirit, and I decided to have a little fun and venture outside what we normally cover. That has a tendency, honestly, to be pretty sad, depressing, or sometimes conspiratorial, and downright strange. So I wanted to divert from that for this week to some topics that are more fun and interesting with some Halloween urban legends. Now, why did I choose this topic for this week, you might be asking? That's because with the impending Halloween sneaking right up on us, I felt like it was only par for the course that I do a Halloween-related episode. And after all, I did one last year with the Beast of Gévaudan episode, all the way back in Season 1. So I wanted to keep the tradition going. So, how I decided to run this week's episode is that I've selected a variety of different Halloween or Halloween-esque urban legends, and we're going to break them down one by one, see if there's any truth behind them, and discuss my personal thoughts and opinions on them, and then move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. So that being said, the legends that I've compiled today to discuss on today's episode are the Headless Horseman, poisoned Halloween candy myths, Bloody Mary, and the Vanishing Hitchhiker legend. So with that being said, let's move into the first of these legends, the Headless Horseman. Now, pretty much everyone at some point in time has heard of the Headless Horseman, and even know what he might be, or even have heard the story and the legend behind him. But for the sake of the episode, and for those who might not be familiar with the story that many Americans might be familiar with, I'm going to share a little background info on that. The story of the Headless Horseman originates with a story called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, written by American writer Washington Irving in 1820. The story describes a lanky schoolteacher named Ichabod Crane, who recently moved to Sleepy Hollow, a town in Westchester County, New York. When arriving in town, Ichabod is fascinated about the stories in town about a spooky presence that hangs over, and the stories spread around town about a mysterious figure named the Headless Horseman. Now, this spirit, the Headless Horseman, that haunts the town, and Washington Irving describes the spirit in his story as, and I quote, Commander-in-Chief of all powers of the air. Now, the Headless Horseman is described as a lonely rider on horseback, cloaked in black garb and coats, while carrying his head in his arms while he rides. Now, his horse is jet black in color as well, and other versions of the story that have been developed over time have rather the horseman carrying around a pumpkin in his arms rather than his head, or a jack-o'-lantern too, according to some accounts. Now, while in Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod Crane becomes smitten with a heiress living in town named Katrina von Tassel. However, Ichabod is not alone in his kind of feelings for love and affection towards Van Tassel. In his effort to try and court Van Tassel, his arch-nemesis in the story, a Dutchman named Brom Bones, is trying to do the same. While attending a party at the Van Tassel farm, Ichabod notices Katrina's presence and tries to sweep her off her feet. However, he fails and leaves the party defeated and rejected. Ichabod climbs back on top of his horse and rides home. However, on his ride home, he is attacked by the Headless Horseman. However, not the real horseman, but rather Brom Bones, disguised as the horseman. Frightened by the horseman, Ichabod flees, but is unable to escape the pursuit of the horseman, and throws his head at Ichabod, and Ichabod is never seen or heard from again. The story of the Headless Horseman and the legend of Sleepy Hollow is immortalized in pop culture forever, But is there any truth to the idea of a ghostly apparition on horseback stalking the Hudson River Valley? That remains unclear, but kind of unlikely. It is hotly debated on where Washington Irving discovered the inspiration for his story of the Horseman, with some experts claiming that he drew inspiration from a poem by Sir Walter Scott, published in 1796, titled The Chase, which was a translation of a German poem titled The Wild Huntsman. Elizabeth Bradley, a historian from historic Hudson Valley, states that Scott and Irving had actually interacted with each other, and it is possible that Irving could have used Scott's poem's translation as the framework for the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Bradley states, and I quote, Irving had just met and become friends with Scott in 1817, so it's very likely he was influenced by his new mentor's work. The poem is about a wicked hunter who is doomed to be hunted forever by the devil and the dogs of hell as punishment for his crimes. Close quote. Now, it is possible that the legend was inspired also about a Revolutionary War victim who was buried near the real-life Sleepy Hollow. Now, this being a Hessian soldier fighting on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War during the Battle of White Plains in 1776. Now, this soldier just happened to be decapitated by a cannonball during battle and was buried near the town. Now, Washington Irving, of course, grew up in this area, and if stories were spread about this decapitated soldier, he most certainly would have heard about them. Now, he also could have been inspired by other ghost stories he heard growing up, and of all of this could have contributed to the inspiration of the story. However, this isn't the only story in which the idea of a horse-riding spirit or headless horseman exists. Now, it turns out many cultures, mostly in Europe and even Scandinavia, have told stories about headless horsemen. Now, in Germany, headless horseman riders are seen as a bad omen, and a story that originates from the mythology of King Arthur details a story in which a knight of Camelot beheads a green giant, only for the monster to now not die, but rather ride off on horseback with his decapitated head in hand. Now, one of the most similar legends to the headless horseman that we know in America comes from Celtic mythology, and that is of the Dullahan, a black-cloaked figure often described on a horse of the same color, being all black, being headless, although sometimes not to some accounts, and instead of riding a horse, sometimes he is also seen driving the death coach, which is a horse-drawn cart with a coffin attached, and arrives and makes his presence known to people whose death might be near, and is also the harbinger of death, and can condemn anyone to death. Kind of like the Grim Reaper of Ireland, in a way. That's the best way I can kind of describe it for you folks. The Dullahan seems to be more fear-inducing and scarier of a figure than its American cousin, but it does carry its head in its arms, which is similar, but it does have a wide smile and jagged, threatening teeth on this head that he's carrying. But on the other hand, the Dullahan also carries a whip made from a human spine, which is very much different from the American headless horseman that we see in fiction and pop culture. Now, the death coach that the Dullahan is also supposedly ridden is also made from a variety of human skeleton parts. Now, it is rumored that a way to scare the Dullahan away, according to Celtic mythology, is if you possess gold. Now, there's a story from County Galway in Ireland about a supposed encounter/legend in which the Dullahan was scared away from possibly gaining a victim through that person having gold on them. It goes like the following, and I quote, "A man was on his way home one night between Roundstone and Ballyconnolly. It was getting dark, and all of a sudden he heard the sound of horses' hooves pounding along the road behind him. Looking back, he saw the headless horseman of Ireland, the Dullahan, on his charger, hurtling towards him at a fair speed. With a loud shout, he made to run, but the thing came on after him, gaining on him all the time. In truth, it would have overtaken him and carried him away had he not dropped a gold-headed pin from the folds of his shirt on the road behind him. There was a roar in the air above him, and when he looked again, the Dullahan was gone." The Dullahan seems more based in folklore, with some considerable legend to back it up as well. In a book titled A Folklore Survey of County Clare by Thomas Weston Westrop, an account of the Dullahan is provided, and it is the following, and I quote, "On the night of December 11th, 1876, a servant of the McNamara's was going his rounds at Ennistimon. In the dark, he heard the rumbling of wheels on the back avenue, and knowing from the hour and place that no mortal vehicle could be coming, concluded that it was the death coach, and ran on, opening the gates before it. He had just time to open the third gate and throw himself on his face beside it at the bank, before he heard a coach go clanking past. It did not stop at the house, but passed on. The following day, Admiral Sir Burton McNamara died in London. Now, the Dullahan is regarded to be the reincarnation of the Irish god Crom Duff, and if I butchered that, I do apologize. I did look up the definition because this is spelled Cromdubh, and it is pronounced Crom Duff, so I hope I am pronouncing that right. Now, Crom Duff was worshipped in ancient times as the god of fertility, but he was also an evil and maleficent entity, who demanded human sacrifices from those who worshipped him. King Tigermas, an ancient high king of Ireland, according to legend, worshipped Crom Duff and provided him these sacrifices, these human sacrifices. And since Crom Duff was a god of fertility, because he would get these human sacrifices, he would provide then bountiful harvests to those who provided him these sacrifices. Now, when Christianity started to make its way throughout Ireland in the 6th century, many people converted and left the old religious practices behind, which was rumored to have upset Crom Duff, who decided to take matters into his own hands and transform himself into Dullahan and claim souls of those that he was deprived from taking. Overall, the story of the Dullahan is so much more badass of that compared to the origin of the Headless Horseman. However, to me, these seem very much based in fiction rather than fact. Other than the stories and legends spread around, we have no proof that these Headless Horsemen exist. However, if I were to believe in one, I would much more believe in the Dullahan, because of this written documentation and lore surrounding his creation and purpose. Now, in my general opinion about all of this, about Dullahan, about Headless Horseman, this seems more story-based than anything else. The idea of the Dullahan, of course, I would believe in more than the American Headless Horseman, because the American Headless Horseman does originate from a book. However, the idea of a ghost that was decapitated by a cannonball in the Revolutionary War and haunts the area for all of eternity, that's pretty cool as well. But if anything, I believe that possibly the Dullahan maybe exists in some capacity. But overall, I think, again, these are just legend and folklore and tales to explain things that maybe we can't always explain. Next up, we have the poisoned candy legend/myth. Now, as probably as many kids did while they were growing up, I too got the routinely spiel every Halloween to make sure I looked through my candy, to make sure there wasn't anything that wasn't supposed to be in there, along with my cachet of goodies and sweets that I had collected over the course of the night. Now, throughout my life, I had heard more about this urban legend, if you will, about people actually poisoning children's Halloween candy for malicious intent. So it got me wondering, did this actually happen, or perhaps was this an overblown misunderstanding? And for that, I kind of wanted to find out. Finding a start date for the legend of poisoned candy seems to be next to impossible, as many different sources I found all seem to come to the agreement that no one is sure for certain, but most likely could have originated or gained inspiration with a story and case from 1964, but could have even started in some capacity before that. In 1964, a New York woman named Heather Feel was accused and arrested over a stunt she pulled on trick-or-treaters in her neighborhood by handing out items like ant poison and basically bad treats and other miscellaneous objects to trick-or-treaters in her neighborhood that she felt like were too old to be trick-or-treating. Of course, law enforcement did not find this funny. Now, Joel Best, a professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Delaware, has launched a project on researching the origins of poison candy, or what he calls, quote-unquote, Halloween sadism, since 1985. Now, he spoke to Today.com and said the following, and I quote, "I knew a folklorist who was born in the 30s, and she reported hearing stories about people who would keep pennies on a skillet and then pour hot pennies into the outstretched hands of trick-or-treaters." He continued in this article to Today.com and said, "The worry that somebody might be contaminating treats has been around for a while. It picked up speed in the 1960s. By the late 1960s, it was pretty well embedded. The continuing idea of poisoned Halloween candy can be further supported by the only confirmed death of a child getting poisoned from his Halloween candy comes from the story of Ronald Clark O'Brien, who in 1974 gave cyanide-laced pixie sticks to his son and 5 other children. The other children did not eat the pixie stick, but his son Timothy did and died shortly afterwards. It turns out that O'Brien had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on his son, and that was the motivation to kill him. Now, he was ultimately convicted of his crimes and was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and was executed in 1984. Regardless, this wasn't a case directed towards trick-or-treaters, merely a one-off incident. We haven't been able to find any deaths in regards to actual trick-or-treating related deaths. But Ronald Clark O'Brien, after this incident, became known as the Candyman and the man who killed Halloween. And understandably so, and is a prime example of the evil contained in some human beings. So is the idea that poison candy, is this a reality? That's something we need to be on the lookout for on Halloween night? Both yes and no. Yes, as in these things do happen even to this day. In 2022, police in Westfield, Massachusetts had to put out a Facebook warning advisory over possible contaminated goodies, as the advisory read, and I quote, "Received a report from a citizen that she located a wrapped razor blade within the candy her child collected at Westfield's Pumpkin Fest today." At this time, the Westfield police are unable to prove or disprove this allegation. In an abundance of caution, if you attended Pumpkin Fest today, please thoroughly inspect any candy you collected. In another incident in 2022, police in Eugene, Oregon also got a report about a razor blade wrapped in a child's candy, and that parents should inspect candy thoroughly before their child enjoys it. And even recently, in May of this year, the FDA made an announcement that stated the following: "Tell children not to accept, and especially not to eat, anything that isn't commercially wrapped. Inspect commercially wrapped treats for signs of tampering, such as unusual appearance or discoloration, tiny pinholes or tears in wrappers. Throw anything away that looks suspicious." Now, even though we're seeing cases of this happening, poisonings and illnesses from them still remain at zero. The FDA has even stated that they have had no known reports of any poisoned Halloween candy to this date, and even in Canada, health officials have only documented 4 cases of suspected candy tampering, according to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, between April of 2008 and October of 2019. So this phenomenon does happen, but the extent of it that is portrayed in popular culture and society is massively overblown. My personal theory on this is that, in fact, that this is mostly a combo of societal events and tall tales for the most part. Some of this does happen in the event of rogue razor blade, like in Massachusetts and Oregon, but for the most part, people don't want to hurt kids, and with the rise of activities like trunk or treat, preventing kids from walking up to strangers' houses, we might even see less than what we even see now, and that's pretty few and far between. I think it's still important to play it safe on Halloween and when it comes to being wary of strangers and checking candy, but it might be a bigger worry to make sure that you're protecting yourself from other more popular Halloween crimes like theft and burglary. But with that being said, let's move now onto the legend of Bloody Mary. Now, everyone is most likely familiar with the idea of Bloody Mary and even who she was in some capacity, but we all know about the myth and legend about saying her name in a mirror and appearing before you just to curse you and damn you for all eternity. Now, it is debated the historical evidence to support whether or not Bloody Mary was a real person, and who could have inspired the legend that we know of Bloody Mary today. But for those of you who have not heard the legend of Bloody Mary, let me give you a little crash course on it. Now, there are 2 variations of the Bloody Mary legend, one of them being a more historic version of the legend, which involved women looking into a mirror in a dark house, with the light of a candle illuminating the mirror, and while doing this, it was supposed to be a precursor, and show the women who were conducting this ritual the face of the man that they would eventually go on to marry later in life. However, that wouldn't always happen. Sometimes these women would see the face of either a skull or the Grim Reaper, and this would indicate that they would die before they ever got the chance to marry anybody. Now, of course, that is worlds different from the legend we often hear about today. In the modern-day legend, Bloody Mary would reveal herself to those who summon her through an act of divination by saying her name 13 times in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room. Now, when Bloody Mary appears, a variety of things can occur. She can sometimes be benign and peaceful, but most of the times is evil, spiteful, and malevolent, and those who summoned her have to go through the entire ritual of seeing this blood-soaked woman appear in the mirror and possibly strangle them, steal their soul, and scratch at their eyes. That alone is enough for me not to do it. I'm very much okay. I'm good. However, many people wonder who the inspiration for this legend could have originated from. and it seems like the vast consensus is the idea that Bloody Mary is based on the same woman in 16th century England that bore the same moniker. Mary I of England reigned as queen from 1553 to 1558, and I could get into their entire family history and affairs of the Tudor family that left Mary as a rightful ruler. However, I don't want to get too into that, as I don't think it fully pertains to today's topic, but I will explain how in her short 5-year reign as Queen of England, how she became known as Bloody Mary. Now, it is no secret that during the Middle Ages, and in particular in 16th century England, religious persecution was always a thing. And it all depended on where you fell in the totem pole for that religion on whether or not you would be persecuted from the crown, which is pretty fucked up. Mary happened to be a Roman Catholic, and she wanted to restore England back to recognizing its kind of Roman Catholicism as the state religion, and when England got word of this, the Protestant Christian population were like, no thank you. Like, if you put Roman Catholicism as the state religion, that means you're going to persecute us as Protestants, and you're probably going to kill us, that would be obviously not good in any way, shape, or form. Now, in Queen Mary's effort to restore Roman Catholicism, she married Prince Philip II of Spain, who was described as like a champion in this attempted Roman Catholic revival during this time period. Now, when it was official that the marriage was going to happen, and the Protestants would most likely be persecuted just for being Protestants, an insurrection took place with the Protestants rapidly advancing towards London, led by Sir Thomas Wyatt. Queen Mary would make a public speech rousing the citizens of the country to fight for her and against the Protestants. This revolt wouldn't last, as Wyatt would be captured and executed, and Mary would restore the laws against heresy and persecuted hundreds of Protestants and burn them at the stake. In the following years, more bloodshed would persist, and it would make Queen Mary I extremely unlikable in public eye, and in turn, she would earn the moniker of Bloody Mary after her slaughter of Protestants in the region. Of course, she wouldn't be the only member of the royal family to persecute different religions. However, something about the Bloody Mary moniker has stuck with her even almost 475 years later. Now, how do I personally feel about the Bloody Mary legend? I think it's something that is always going to exist in folklore and has a decent amount of history behind it, that is. Do I think it's real? No, I don't think it's real. I think it's pretty well documented that Bloody Mary is kind of like a myth, although I haven't done a tremendous amount of research into people who've supposedly seen Bloody Mary. It just kind of seems like a very interesting legend that people tell, again, around, Halloween time, so on and so forth. I find more fascination behind the history behind it, and whether or not Queen Mary I was the inspiration for the Bloody Mary legend we know today, again, that is still debated. But lastly, let's talk about the legend of the Vanishing Hitchhiker. Now, we have previously brushed over the idea of phantom travelers along America's roadways in prior episodes, and as it turns out, they're a very popular story that seems to resurface every year around Halloween time. And because of that, I decided to throw that in with today's episode as well. And when I started digging into this, it seems this legend is a lot more widespread than I thought, and is widespread throughout the entire United States, and seemingly every area of the country has a story about a ghostly figure appearing on the side of the roadway. Now, we have stories of a vanishing hitchhiker in Los Angeles, who is dressed in all white, and when she gets inside your car, she instructs you to take her to the cemetery, and then vanishes, just as she appeared. In Massachusetts, a red-headed flannel-wearing hitchhiker has been spotted and has a pattern of getting picked up and proceeding to laugh maniacally in the backseat before suddenly vanishing. We have actually talked about this hitchhiker before, in particular, back in the Bridgewater Triangle episode as well. Now, it turns out that the U.S. alone contains almost 80 separate instances of these legends, and they seem to have a lot of things in common, like the lore and the connection to significant locations in the area, and the U.S. is not alone in this department. The legend of vanishing hitchhikers and these ghostly apparitions on the side of the road seems to have roots in China, India, Romania, and Africa. However, this legend seems to be fading in popularity and in supposed sightings, and that could be for a combination of different reasons. Now, one of these reasons being the idea that hitchhiking isn't done very much anymore, and when it is, people are a lot more hesitant to pick up strangers. Very different compared to the mid-1900s and late 1900s. This legend is also becoming pretty popular and pretty widespread, causing people to have a better understanding of the legend and perhaps be more skeptical on the authenticity of possible sightings and the existence of these wandering spirits. We have seen the story of the Vanishing Hitchhiker appear in all sorts of mixed media, like television, radio, books, and other assorted stories, and I could pick some of these and go into more detail, but again, I just wanted to do a very overarching look into the phenomenon for this week's episode. So, what are my thoughts on the whole Vanishing Hitchhiker stories? I think it's hard to tell which ones are fake and which ones are real, just due to the sheer numbers of stories we can see from across the US and the world for that matter. Do I think that some of these are real? Yes, I do. But do I think that some of these are fakes that could be inspired from the increase in press these stories have gotten from the late 1900s? That's kind of hard to tell. And possibly, I will cover some of these cases in a little more detail in future episodes. But with that being said, I really appreciate you all turning into the Halloween episode of Unblurring the Unknown. I know it's a little shorter than what you might be used to from me, and for that, I do apologize. And I hope that it was a good change of pace from what you are used to from me. Of course, I apologize for the long absence, but also I had some things in my life that took priority over the show, and I hope you all can understand that. But I hope that doesn't change anything going forward, and that I can keep up making content and more episodes for you all. But with that being said, obviously, if you've listened to my show before, you know I do these plugs at the end of the show. If you were listening to this on Spotify, please turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I post a new episode. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out so greatly, and I so appreciate it. I'm also on Instagram at Unblurring the Unknown. Follow me there. I greatly appreciate it as well. Feel free to send me topic suggestions to my email at unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. I'll say that again, unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. You can send them an Instagram direct message too. Send me those topic suggestions. I do get to them. I have done episodes on topic suggestions before. Feel free to send those to me. I'll add them to my episode queue, and I will try and get to them as soon as I possibly can. Also, go ahead and follow me on TikTok at Unblurring the Unknown, where I post 1 minute breakdowns of the episodes that I do. I hope to get back into doing that again. Part of me taking this break was kind of a little move and kind of a reshuffle of my belongings and things of that nature. So I don't have a designated space right now where I'm doing podcasting, but I hope that changes here in the future. And I'm able to have a designated space, and from there, do my TikToks, do my recording, all in one central space, so it kind of all sounds coherent. And I'm in one room. I'm not, I know sometimes my audio is a little booming, sometimes it's a little softer. So for that, again, I do apologize. Hope to have that kind of nailed down in the next couple weeks, and I appreciate your patience on that matter. But with that being said, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Unblurring the Unknown. This kind of fun little venture into some Halloween urban legends with Halloween rapidly approaching. And again, I hope you all appreciated it, and I will see you all on the next one.